What's up, guys? Welcome back to another daily Bible reading snapshot. Today we're looking at Psalm 22, 23, and 24. Super famous chapters here in the Old Testament that we're checking out today. Psalm 22 actually has a lot of quotations that you're going to find in here that Jesus actually quotes about himself. And Jesus is going to take a lot of these quotations and apply them to his situation. And whenever Jesus does something like that, that always reminds us that sometimes when this is being written, like this is a Psalm of David, clearly David wrote this about his own situation, but God intended it for something even beyond his situation. He intended it not just for our feelings and how we approach the scriptures, but really pointing forward towards Jesus. So I think this is one of those messianic psalms, the psalms about Jesus. So let's check this out. Chapter 22 talks about how it feels like God has forsaken the author. So David says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" You might remember when Jesus said this on the cross. He felt like, I'm being forsaken by God. In verse 3 he says, "Yet you are holy." Again, when these kind of ideas and complaints come up, what is the first response that these righteous people give? Specifically David here. What does he say? "Yet I know that God is holy." So even though it feels like I'm forsaken by God, I know that he will not totally deliver me over to his enemies. It talks about how the enemies of David at this point mocked him and said, "You trust God? Well, if you trust God, God will get you out of this." Same thing happened with Jesus. They said, if you believe in God, if you trust God, then he can take you down from the cross. But instead of saying, "Yeah, totally, you're right, he can," instead of saying that, he is mocked and he's taking all this insult. In verse 16, it says, "Dogs have encompassed me." They've surrounded me. It's like I'm surrounded by all these wild animals. "They've pierced my hands and my feet." Also interesting, right? That happens with Christ. His hands and his feet are pierced. And then it says, "I count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me. They divide my garments among them, and they cast lots for my clothing." What does that mean? Well, that's what happens literally with Jesus. With David, it seems like that might be a figurative way of saying all of my stuff is gone. They've taken my stuff. It's like they're selling off all my stuff. Whether that happened literally or is just hyperbole, which just means an exaggeration, whether David actually had them steal his clothing and sell them, that may or may not be true. He might just be saying that to make a point about his bad situation. But we know it's literally true with what happened with Jesus. So again, what happens after this? It says, "Yet I will tell of your name to my brothers." I'm going to tell people about how good God is. What happened? Where's the shift? Why did he at one point say, "God's forsaken me," and then said, I know God is holy, and I know that I can tell of God's goodness to people? It's because God is willing to save these people, deliver my soul from the sword. That's verse 20. But then it says at the end of this chapter, in verse 27, "All the ends of the earth shall remember and turn to the Lord." That's the ultimate goal of all of this, that people would turn to God through this situation. Through David's suffering, he wants people to turn to God. Interesting, you know that's true with Jesus. Through his suffering, people turn from every nation. They turn to trust in God. I just want you to see how amazing this actually describes the situation of Jesus. So that's Psalm 22. Psalm 23, probably you know much about this. This is a famous psalm, Psalm 23. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake." And then it goes on to talk about the hard times. "Yet, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Again, David says, God's with me. He's my shepherd. I trust in him. And I know, verse 6, "Surely goodness and mercy shall pursue me." It will chase after me all the days of my life. And I'll dwell in the house of the Lord forever after I die. So a lot of interesting things are happening here. One thing I want you to notice, again, I'll tie it in with chapter 24 here, where it talks about how God owns everything. Just like he's the shepherd, he's also the creator. Psalm 24:1, he owns everything. And he is the King of glory. And there's this idea in chapter 24 where these questions are asked. Who is the King of glory? Strong, the Lord, strong and mighty. It's mighty in battle. So the question is, who is the King of the glory? The answer is the Lord is. Now, as you look at Psalm 22, 23, and 24, there is something that is messianic about all three of them. Because I want you to recognize that Jesus was forsaken like David. And also, Psalm 23 Jesus said about himself in John 10, I am the good shepherd. Like the Lord is the shepherd, Jesus is our good shepherd. And in chapter 24, he is the King of glory who enters in the gates of the city. So I want you to see how amazing these 3 chapters are and how amazing they fit together when we look and see Jesus in these passages. So, all right, that's our Old Testament reading today. Let's look at the New Testament. We're looking at Acts chapter 20. Now, this is a lot of travel narrative, which again, that might sound boring, but it describes to us where Paul is going. So it says he is, first of all, yesterday, he was in Ephesus. There was that big riot from yesterday. Now it says he's going to pass through Macedonia and go to Greece, and he's going to go back to Philippi and to Troas. And when he's in one of these cities, when he's in Troas, he stayed there for 7 days. He actually raises this guy from the dead. It says there was a young man who fell asleep during Paul's sermon. So think about that. If you've ever fallen asleep during a sermon, it's happened before. The only difference is this sermon went until midnight. So if I ever am at something and you're there and I preach until midnight, I understand why you fall asleep. So this guy, Eutychus, fell asleep. Problem was he fell out of a window when he fell asleep, and he actually hit his head and died. And because of that, all the people were obviously mourning over this, but Paul raises him from the dead, gives him that new life back through the power of Christ. Obviously, it's not Paul doing this miracle. It's God doing it through Paul. And after this, it said that people were not a little comforted. Basically to say they were super comforted because Eutychus was back to life. Then it talks about a couple more places where Paul went, and it says he's trying to get to Jerusalem, if possible, by Pentecost. So that sets us up for the next scene that we're going to look at tomorrow. But what I want you to see is God is working through all of these plans, through the travel, through all of that, obviously through the miracle. But I want you to see that God works through this to accomplish his big plan. So even though your life might not seem as eventful or exciting, just know that God is working out his big plan in this world, even through our lives today. So thanks for reading with us. We'll see you back tomorrow for another daily Bible reading snapshot.